Hello there. You're listening to another new episode of NMPC Plus. I am, as always, Josh. I am the worship pastor at New Mercy Palisades Church, little old church plant that could, and I am joined by my friend, my colleague, my sister in Christ, person I've known for all of 18 months, Pastor Bobe. Hello, Pastor Bobe.
Hello.
And I am joined also by our fearless leader, also friend, also colleague, also the person that officiated my wedding. I'm just remembering that.
Yes,
Did you really?
I did.
Yeah.
Wow.
Pastor Key. Hello, Pastor Key.
Hello.
I don't know what that intro was, but how you guys doing today? It's a little weird. It's a little wonky. How you guys doing?
Good. It's a beautiful day. The weather's awesome.
It is honestly a great and beautiful day.
It is a beautiful day.
Yeah.
I woke up feeling really good.
Whoa.
Really good.
That's nice.
Which is not very often.
That's so sad.
I think part of it is because I prepared their lunch last night.
Okay. The kids?
Which made the morning easier.
Sure.
What are they getting today?
Egg salad.
Cute.
The whole house smelled like eggs.
I love eggs, yo. I can have
Egg salad.
every meal.
Especially those jammy eggs that you had the other day. Remember?
Yeah,
with
yeah.
the
That was
crispy
so
tteokbokki?
good. Yeah.
Honey day.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of that, we were just out in Glen Rock, New Jersey yesterday, and we visited one of the families that just had a new addition to their family.
That's
yeah,
right.
Kelly and Juwon.
Yep.
Yeah. We went out there to go visit baby Parker, to see the parents, Kelly and Juwon, just to pray for them. Man, that baby's so cute.
Oh my goodness.
I know. It's so precious.
Such a cute baby.
So precious.
When I first laid eyes on Parker, I was like, man, she's so pretty.
Does it bring you back to...
It does.
Yeah?
It does.
Do you miss those days?
I do not. I miss like 10% of those days
Sure.
where you're just holding them, they're all peaceful.
Sure.
But 90% is painful.
Pastor Key, I want to ask a question.
Pooping and sleeping. Yep. I mean, crying.
I want to ask a question.
Yeah.
What is the best part of fatherhood? I'm asking as, one day prospective father myself.
You know, I don't know if this is the best part, but I had this thought as I was making the egg salad sandwiches for them yesterday, cutting all the eggs and, making the whole thing. I thought to myself, I'm doing this despite the fact that they treat me like crap. Despite the fact that they're going to give me attitude the next morning.
Yes.
And it actually felt good. Like, I was like, that's how much I love them.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't matter what they do to me. I'll still make them egg salad.
Yeah. The love that is born in the crucible of searing hot vengeance.
So wait, is that like your favorite part of fatherhood?
Yeah, the pettiness.
Oh, I see.
All the pettiness.
No, no, just the love experience. I think that's what it is.
Sure.
And, no matter what they do, at least up to my experience so far, just this overwhelming love that just doesn't go away. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. That's nice.
It's also nice when they're nice to me.
That is nice.
But yeah, I would say that.
That's very cute. That's very nice. Actually, I'm reminded of a conversation. So when we went out to go see Kelly Juwon and little baby Parker, Pastor Bobby, you rode with me.
Yeah.
And I forget if it was on the way there or on the way back, but you asked me a question of something like, do you take a lot of photos with your family?
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, no. And you were telling me of a very and vastly different experience.
Yeah.
Of how you always take pictures with your family, and that blows my mind.
I don't really love taking pictures, but I do sneak peek pictures and videos of my parents and our family.
Yeah.
And my sister always threatens me. She goes, if you ever lost your phone, I'm dead. And that means you're dead. So don't ever lose your phone. Because in here
Yeah.
is a lifetime's worth of blackmail
Sure.
for every person in my
Sure.
family.
Sure.
So she's like, don't ever lose your phone.
Sure.
But I started doing that because I realized my parents are getting older. And so it sounds very morbid, but I'm like preparing
Yeah.
for when I miss them,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So that's why I do these things. And my mom likes to take pictures with us. I don't like that. And we got into a fight about that in Paris when we were there last year.
Nice.
We fought at the Louvre, and that was like such a crap show. But
What the?
but it's memorable, right? The Louvre will always be the place that I had a fight with my mom.
Yeah.
Like the place that I had a argument. But as I'm getting older and as my parents are getting older, I'm always thinking about like, oh, these are the things I have to cherish.
Yeah.
I think that's where it comes from.
Yeah.
So I like take these little pictures and videos of them just like laughing at nothing. Like, things like that. Just cute moments in my family.
And when did that start for you?
Like 3 years ago. Yeah, so it's been a while. So I'm always like doing stupid,
So 29 years old.
before I turned 30, I think.
So Pastor Key, 14 years,
Yeah.
15 years maybe? Just hold on for 15 more years. It'll get better, I think.
Yeah.
Man.
I'm sure your kids have ugly pictures of you that they look at and be like, ah, ha, ha, my dad is so
Yeah.
stupid. Look at this picture.
don't
I do
know
that with
about
my
that.
parents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She makes these collages.
Of you?
No, of like her friends and the things that she's done for like the past couple of years.
Yeah.
And we don't show up in any of those collages.
I think that's very natural for a teenager. No?
That's fine.
When I was a teenager, I didn't care about my parents like that.
That's true.
Yeah. Yeah, I have I come from a family of 3 boys. And it just, we're not, first of all, we're like Korean American, and that there's already a level of like how boys are with their parents in Korean American culture. And then we're also like, the parents of immigrants, but my parents speak very good English. And so there isn't even like a language barrier that I could really lean on. It's just a matter of like such a different experience. And my wife, like she is one of 2 girls, and it's basically like her sister and her mom, they talk all the time.
Yeah.
And they have such a different way of relating to each other. Like they call each other all the time. And like we'll be at home because we live in the same house as my parents right now. And so like they'll come home. My parents will come home, I should say. And my wife will look over while we're watching TV or something. And she goes like, "Oh, your parents are home. Should we go up and say hi?" I'll just look at her like, "That's not what we do. we don't. I hear them. That's my mom going to the kitchen, and that's my dad going upstairs. That's all the information that I need to know." And she just looks at me like, what is wrong with you? And so, yeah, I mean, when I hear those kinds of things, I just go, that's such a different experience for me. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Speaking of my parents, speaking of my family, actually, I had an interesting conversation not too long ago with my parents. Not to get too into it, but there's a point here, I swear. I had an interesting conversation with them not too long ago, and I think I might have shared another story about my parents on this podcast, maybe previously as related to my calling. In any case, we were just talking about stuff, this, that, and the other thing. And then eventually they had sort of relayed to me, I should say, that like they were finally thinking about retirement. Mm-hmm. And, if you are the child of immigrant parents, and if you are an immigrant parent, like that word retirement is such like an interesting sort of a thing. Like, I'm so used to an experience where like Korean parents never retire. They just work and work and work, and they continue to work. And then eventually they just get taken from this mortal coil. But my parents sort of like were just saying like, hey, yeah, we're finally thinking about it. They're nearing 70. My mother is 68. She's going to turn 70 at the end of 2025. And the reason why I bring that up is because when they were talking about retirement, when they were talking about, like what their plans were, just like nothing set in stone, but just sort of this is what they would like to do after a conversation with each other. It kind of got me thinking a little bit about like, man, what about my retirement? I mean, I'm really far from that. And I think we all are pretty far from that age. But every once in a while, I go like, man, I wonder what life is going to look like for me when I get to that place, when I finally start thinking about that word. I also started thinking about like, the fact that I'm in ministry and I'm a pastor. The question becomes like, for a pastor, does the word retirement even exist? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I just thought maybe like we could talk about that for a little bit. I mean, we have different years of experience in ministry around this table, and I wondered like, I don't know, how often do you guys think about the sort of, to use an old Boys to Men song, the end of the road, when it comes to, you like your time in ministry and, all that stuff. So I don't know, like, have you guys thought much about retirement, sort of like what you would do whenever you get to that place?
No, because I feel like I'm just starting. Like out of the three of us, I have the least amount of years as a pastor.
Sure.
And I feel like, yeah, I'm a pastor. I've been doing this for the last 5.5 years or whatever, but I feel like I'm just getting started.
Yeah.
So I'm always thinking about what am I doing next. But when I do think about retirement, I don't think a pastor truly retires.
Sure.
I think the only thing you retire from is being attached to a ministry.
Sure.
But I don't necessarily think you stop pastoring people, because even if you retire, there are going to be people that need care, that need shepherding. And I think the call of a pastor is for a lifetime. But when I think about, if I were to just imagine just quickly what I would want my, how I would like to finish, is that I would have been a fruitful pastor. That the people I led, the seeds that I've planted would bear good fruit. Yeah, and whatever that looks like, I don't know yet, but I think that's probably the biggest desire that I have for when I look forward to the end, which, is hopefully very, very far.
Yeah,
Yeah.
hopefully.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Pastor Q, what about you? Like, how often do you think about that word retirement?
All the time. No, I thought about it a lot during the pandemic as we were recording videos for sermons. I'm like, I can't do this. I'm tired.
Yeah.
But now that we're out of the pandemic, yeah, I don't think I want to retire ever. I'll stop maybe like being a pastor of a church maybe. But I'm actually, if I don't end up, say, like teaching adjunct at a seminary or something like that, I might just do missions for the rest of my life. I don't know, write, give pulpit supply, preach at churches here and there. Where,
Sure.
I can say whatever I want and just leave.
Sure.
Oh my God.
Sure.
But yeah, I don't know, just something that Bobe said kind of struck me was, I don't know, I know so many pastors who retired and they didn't finish well, meaning like something happened to their church where it just fell apart or something like that. I know too many stories like that. And then, I just can't imagine how sad they must be after laboring all those years and then finishing with that kind of legacy.
Sure.
But then that gets me thinking, like, that could happen to me. That can happen to anybody. And can I get to a place where no matter what it looks like, I'm still content in the ministry that I did? I have an identity apart from my accomplishments, so to speak. And I don't know, I hope I get there.
Yeah.
But yeah, those are just some thoughts I have as I think about retirement. But,
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. If I could stay as healthy as I can, I would prefer not to.
Sure.
Because I love what I do.
Sure.
99% of the time.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I generally hold the same view as the both of you. Like, I very seriously doubt that I would get to a place where I'm just like, I don't want to do this ever again. I don't even want to touch this again. Right. Like, there are people that, like they work in a factory for 40 years. Right. Yeah. And then when they retire, they just move completely to a different sector of work or life, or they just enjoy their hobby and they never do anything ever again. But for a pastor, and I'm sure there are other things like that, where for a pastor it's just like so different. You know what I mean? Like, you never really retire. And what's up, Pastor Key?
Trying to throw out his gum.
Okay. He's trying to retire the gum. Sorry. No worries. Yeah, so I don't know. I know like few other professions. I know few other vocations like this where like there's no real true retirement.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's it's that old thing of like there's a difference between volunteering and being volunteered, where like someone else volunteers on your behalf, and for others, it's kind of like there's a difference between retiring and being told to retire, or just like having to hang it up because you can't do it anymore, right?
Yeah.
But to that longevity piece, or the idea of like someone who builds up their ministry so much so, and then eventually like it doesn't end well. Yeah. I think about that a lot as well. I think about not it doesn't cripple me. It doesn't cause me to like take downward spirals or anything. But I genuinely think a lot about the idea of where am I going with this? And the other thing that I think about is the idea of like, am I going to be a person that mentors and disciples well? Right? Like, I have a lot of experience, or I should say I have a lot of exposure to pastors and leaders who they themselves built incredible ministries. Mm-hmm. I want to say like incredible ministries, world-renowned ministries. And then when they get to the age where they try to hand it off, they're trying to fit in like a decade's worth of mentoring in 6 months. And then the person that they try to hand it off to like just isn't the person.
Yeah.
Or the version of the ministry that they try to hand off it just isn't the thing that they were doing for the first 40 years, right? And so, yeah, I don't know, like every once in a while, I just think about like when I want to hang it up and maybe just enjoy an easier life or whatever. I wonder if I'm going to be in a place to hand things off well. Do you know what I mean? I mean, it still seems so far away.
No.
But then I also think about like, well, everyone gets there eventually.
Yeah.
Right? So, I don't know.
Interesting.
Do you guys ever think about like, yeah, because like for me, invariably, when I think about retirement,
sorry,
damn, some deep came out of you just then. Invariably for me, when I think about retirement, I think about discipleship. I think about like mentoring and mentoring well and leading people well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, do you guys ever think about that at all? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't ever want a world-renowned ministry. I just want to do something nice and do it well. I have a lot of thoughts about that, but in a sense, I realized as you were talking, I had an opportunity to hand something off, in a sense, because the New Mercy Hackensack, I was the EM pastor. Then I planted that with some people, and then I had to let it go. And there was grieving because I had to let it go, not because of anything bad, but because we're planning something new, right?
Sure.
And the kind of grieving that I experienced during that time, the kind of like are they taking it where I want them to take it? You know, that type of stuff.
Sure,
you know?
sure.
And not that they're doing anything bad, but just kind of in my mind, just this letting go, handing off, not easy. But probably because I'm young. I guess if I'm older, maybe it's a little bit easier. I don't know. Actually, no. I know people who retired who have a really hard time letting go.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Yeah, the jury's still out on whether or not I'd have a hard time retiring when it gets to that. You know, there's a part of me that loves what I do. There's another part of me that just goes, I'd love to play even more golf than I already play. You know what I mean? I don't know. It's just something to think about. There are parts of this podcast, you know, that's for like the everyday person. There are parts of this podcast that are for the church leader and for the one that is trying to take up the mantle of something bigger. And then there are other parts of this podcast where I just want to speak to young leaders, you know, and I just want to speak to young pastors. And I just want to tell them, like, hey, every once in a while, it's probably a good idea to just pick your head up and to, you know, sort of take your eyes off of your feet, I should say, to pick your head up and just think about like the long-term goal, the picture of where you want to go. You know what I mean? I spent a lot of years when I was younger, first couple of years of just sort of like following and going wherever the wind of heaven sort of took me. And there were some great places that it took me. I really, truly believe it. But, you know, there are also some places where I just feel like, man, I could have avoided that.
Yeah.
If I just thought maybe about the bigger thing, and maybe if I prayed harder, or maybe if I just gave a little bit more in terms of devotion, the Lord would have led me in a place to say like, maybe I didn't need to do that, but I followed an ambition and not a calling. And so, I don't know. It's funny, that one little conversation with my parents just kind of sparked this little thing of a thing where now I'm thinking about it. It's like, ooh, I want to be ready when I get there, right? You know, so.
Yeah, make sure your parents find something meaningful after.
Yeah.
They always say when you have retirement, if you don't find something, usually health declines really fast and stuff. So
yeah, it's very funny that you say that, because one of the conversations that I remember having, or it's one of the things that I remembered my father saying specifically. This might be like a heavy thing. This wasn't necessarily where I had planned to take this, but and it just comes to mind. But it's like one of the things that I heard my dad say one time, and it kind of makes sense why he took so long to think about retirement. Because, you know, like for us as his children, and for us as his sons, it's not that they run a dry cleaners and they've been running it for like 35 years in this city. And it's not like we necessarily want the store, or we want to take it over like other children might have with their parents' businesses that they build up. But it's just the idea of like, we see how hard it is on their bodies, right? Like my dad, and especially more in the past couple of years, like he'll come home with like random nicks and cuts on his arm, or because like the steam machines or whatever, like he'll just come home with sometimes just like a huge bandage on his forearm. And I won't see it until the summer. Like it'll happen in the winter and he's wearing sweaters. And like I won't see it until the summer. And I just go like, what is that? He goes, oh yeah, I was just fixing the thing, and then I got my arm too close to the thing. And I'm just like, you gotta take care of yourself. In any case, he was saying the one time where he sometimes gets scared of the idea because he knows people that they retired and then in 5 years they passed away.
Yeah.
It's just that thing of that Korean immigrant, not just Korean, I'm sure other immigrant families where like when you turn off that survival thing of I gotta work, because if I don't work, then what am I doing? Health declines and all that stuff. And man, let's hope that our generation never has to get there.
So my parents, I keep telling them, do missions. After you retire, do missions. Stay active. Otherwise.
If you could choose a good second act, right? Let's say like you're able to forecast decades down the road, and you're able to say like, oh, this is what I would want to do after I'm done with the church ministry, pastoral ministry, all that stuff. What would be a good second act for you guys?
Missions. For me, it's either one or two. It's either missions, just me and Rala in some foreign country doing missions, and teaching maybe, and then the other thing would be seminary professor. One of those two. It's my second act.
Just be a farmer. I'm so serious.
A farmer?
Yeah,
Dude,
buy a
farming
house.
is hard work.
Yeah. I
buy
think
a
I
house
choose
somewhere.
pastoral ministry over farming.
Really? Yeah. I just like
You mean gardener?
no. Like I want a farm.
You want to plow a field?
You want a
Yeah.
ranch? You want a ranch?
I don't want like animals. I want like chickens, maybe a pig.
Uh-huh.
But I want to like grow my own vegetables.
That sounds like a Korean retreat center.
Yeah. That sounds like New Jersey Christian Academy is what it sounds like.
I just want to be a farmer.
A farmer. Interesting. Wow.
Yeah. Have some chickens that lay fresh eggs for me.
Yeah.
Ooh, that sounds good.
And then what would you grow on this farm?
All kinds of stuff, and I'll cook it myself.
Getting it.
Yeah. Perilla leaves.
Every Korean grandparent becomes a farmer eventually.
Yeah, and like the lettuce.
Yeah.
Oh my god,
Yeah.
they grow like crazy.
Yeah.
All you gotta do is just plant them and water them.
Yeah.
That's it. You don't need it. You don't even do
깻잎,
anything.
상추, 고추.
They go crazy. All those
everything.
things.
Hobak, my
Hobak.
my grandparents are great hobak growers.
Why is it that the ones that grow at homes are like this big, like the size of your head? They're like monstrous,
I don't
monstrous or whatever.
I have no idea.
Huge.
My grandfather on my mom's side, I'm grateful to have my grandparents on my mom's side still around.
Yeah.
My grandpa just turned 90 this year,
Wow.
and until last year he was tending the garden.
Yeah.
Wow.
He's 88, 89, walking around with a cane, planting, harvesting these like ginormous hauls of
That's awesome.
of zucchini, of squash, of perilla leaf, of like all this stuff, and you just go, take a break.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Just take a break. In any case, to the young pastor or leader, if I could just say this, look up every once in a while. Think about what happens down the road. It's not always a bad thing to think about a good second act. In fact, I'm sure we can think of different examples in which the second act of somebody's life becomes all the more fulfilling and all that stuff. So, it's a good idea to sort of take a breath every once in a while to do that. We're going to take a quick break, actually, and then we'll get into the sermon conversation after this. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. And we are back. Thank you so much for not doing a single thing and just waiting, because we're going to get into the sermon portion of our conversation. This week I preached.
Yes, you did.
And I
Praise
will
the Lord.
say off the bat, it's been a while since I had preached, and I still sort of had the remembrance of the last time I preached prior to this past Sunday.
Oh yeah.
And, we've been in a kind of, I don't know if it's theme or whatever. We hit a couple times where, like, we would preach. Pastor Key, Pastor Bobe, you'd preach and you kind of go like, I don't know what I said. I don't know what happened. I don't know if that, and that was me, last time I preached. But if I could just start off with this report, it's been a while since I felt that loose and that free.
Nice.
After preaching, it's been a while since I felt like, I was able to do everything that I wanted to do. Like everything that I put on the page, all the little twists and turns that I wanted to do. It's been a while since I felt like I really sort of did that which I wanted to do. And I was still able to deliver it in a way that was true to myself while also being like true to the word. And so were you guys able to have a listen at all? Do you guys have any helpful or careful criticisms that I promise I will not cry about and I will take? But were you guys able to take a listen at all?
I took notes
You took notes? Shoot.
of all the criticism. No, okay. Nothing. I got nothing.
I should have brought my notes. Rebuttal.
That was great, man.
Yeah.
We could tell you were loose up there,
Yeah.
and
It
it's
was
good
nice.
to get that rhythm back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was nice. I felt it like, because, a bunch of us, we come to the church or we come to the school where we meet. We try to get there by 8 a.m. every Sunday, and we try to start setting up. And 9:05, 9:10 is a good place to like really get the ball rolling and have sound going, have the stream set up, and have the praise team practicing by then. And we were like 10, 15 minutes early on all of those accounts. Yeah. And so, just that alone, the idea that I was able to not have to worry or freak out about this, that, and the other thing kind of gave me a lot of help and assurance.
Nice.
Yeah, we were following along, and we continued on in the series of David, the life of David. And, as we've outlined before, the life of David really, we thought, does a lot, and it goes a long way to kind of expanding on the idea of our theme, which is come awake, alive, walking, activated, known, and engaged. And for me, I felt like where I wanted to go with this message was I wanted to talk about the census that David conducts. And, I kind of took it all over the place. I talked about the idea of the David's census towards the end of his life is recorded in two places in the Bible, 2 Samuel as well as 1 Chronicles. That's important because it means that it wasn't just important in the life of King David and the personal narrative of King David, but that it was also important, like the consequences of what happens is also important in the life of Israel, of the nation of Israel, and also God's people, right? So like there's sometimes when you read the Bible and you read somebody's story and it's just the narrative of their story, and there's no like larger thing behind it. But every once in a while, you get both. It's important to the personal history of this person, and it's also important to the overall corporate history, right? And then I just sort of took it to the place of, once this thing happens, like it just shows that like this wasn't a God-initiated census. Because a God-initiated census is really all about like faithfulness. God shows how faithful he's been in the life of his people. So he'll say like, take a census and see how much you've grown since the last time you've been in this place or since the last season. And you'll know that I was with you, and you'll know that you grew because, you have these numbers to fall back on. But a man-initiated census is totally different. And basically all of that was just a lead up to the idea that there was two Davids. The title of my message was The Two Davids. And I talked about the idea where the first David is he's entitled, he's proud, he's dismissive, he's worldly, his eyes are on the situations of this earth. But the second David is completely different. He is repentant, he's sorrowful, he's intentional, he loves the Lord, he knows when he has done wrong, and he tries to make it right, And ultimately, I just decided to take it to a place of, if we are going to really be people that have come awake, so like by the end of this year, one of the marks of saying that we've come awake, number one is to acknowledge the idea that we have two Davids in us. We all have two Davids, right? And then from that place, just to acknowledge like we don't have to let the first David rule all the time. In fact, if we've come awake, we're going to look closer to the second David, the one who's repentant, sorrowful, intentional, and all that stuff. And so, yeah, I mean, that's just my message in a nutshell. I encourage you to go back and listen to it to get the full context of everything. But yeah, I mean, I just wanted to get your guys' thoughts on it, just some of your initial reactions, and we'll sort of take it from there.
Yeah, I liked how you compared the two Davids, because we all have multiple sides of ourselves. And it was interesting that I really liked how you explained the census, because like anybody who reads the Bible, who knows the Old Testament, will be asking like, why was it so bad that David did that? You know? And you're right. It was the motivation. The census that are administered by God is to remember, to be reminded of God's faithfulness, what God did for the nation of Israel, whereas anything man with the census is because they're insecure, because they're trying to, whatever. And it got me thinking about like, what am I like? What is like my senses?
Yeah.
You know, what is something that I'm trying to take count for to feel some kind of security? Because I feel like when David did that, it's also to see like, what do I have in
Yeah.
my possessions? What do
Yeah.
I have? You know, whereas when God is showing the previous times, it's this is what I did for you. This is what your God did for you.
Yeah.
You know, so I think that was that was definitely like a reflection point. Yeah.
Yeah. Husky, what about you?
Oh man, I really like the takeaways at the end. I was going through your sermon to put up a clip, and then just the last one about we remember him as a man after God's own heart, and you're like, and then you put his life under a microscope, and you're like, yo, he's whack. Got some whack moments there.
Sure. Yeah.
So much so that one of his moments are so whack that anybody today would have been canceled.
Yep.
And their legacy would have been forever tarnished, right? But because he was repentant, that repentance was the primary indicator. Hey, this man really is a man after God's own heart. He'll sin like everybody else, but he's always turning back. And I thought that was a great way to end it. It was really good. I like that.
Thanks. You know, it's funny, just in recalling and remembering the sermon, you know, it's the idea that the first David, again, proud, he's dismissive, he wants to know how good he is. And in recalling and in remembering the sermon that I gave this past Sunday, there's a small part of it where me giving that message, or I don't know, maybe talking about that message for me is kind of my David moment, the first David moment for me. Because again, I go, it's been a while since I've been that free and I've been that close to like what I wanted to do. And I kind of did everything that I wanted to do with the message. There's another part of me that goes like, man, I crushed it. I freaking crushed that message. I did everything that I was supposed to do, and I gave it pretty well. And it's so funny how razor thin that dividing line is between the two Davids.
Yeah.
Right? Between the version of you that is prideful, that is dismissive, that whose eyes are on this present moment and this present circumstance, and the version of you that you feel so close to Christ, you feel like the Holy Spirit, you are the embodiment of the Holy Spirit because you feel so filled with the Spirit, right? And for me, in giving that message and even in remembering the message, it's so funny how close, how razor thin that margin is, right? Because like, again, there's two versions of a census in the Bible. There's the God-initiated and there's the man-initiated. They're both censi.
I'll look it up while you're talking.
The jury's out on the plural form of a census, which I also wrestled with on stage when I gave the message. And
Censuses.
Censuses. Okay. Let that be the final word, Josh. When you go back and watch this, let that be the final word. Censuses.
Sensei.
I was thinking of like dice. It's like it's not dices. It's dice. Dice is the plural, and die is the singular. In any case, I don't know where I was going with that. I don't know. In thinking about it now, in reflecting on it now, the message, the biblical lesson behind it, and sort of like who I am as a person, it's always so funny to me when I really think about it, and I go like, man, it's so close. That margin is so razor thin.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Always.
But like when you guys give your messages though, right? And maybe not like the last one for you, Bobe, or whatever, but like, you know, you've given good messages and you've really hit your marks, right?
Yeah.
What's that thing that keeps you from going, damn, I crushed it? Do you know what I mean?
I think generally I don't know that I crushed it until people tell me that I did.
Sure.
So, but then I'll go back and listen to it. I'm like, okay, that was pretty solid.
Yeah.
And then I always remember, but boy, remember that it's not gonna be like this next time. I think that's what makes me like stay in my lane a little bit instead of taking it, be like, oh man, I'm the ish.
Yeah.
You know, trying to like
The ish.
Yeah, I don't want to like I really try hard to like not gas myself up because once I do that, I know myself, and I know 1000% I will not put in the same type of work that I did to this one. And that's dangerous.
Yep.
That's a very dangerous thing because pride is so easy, especially I think for people who have the stage. You know, it's so easy to think, oh, I'm awesome. And like, oh, people like what I do. Oh, even if I didn't put in this much work, people like it. And like kind of roll in that. But that's not the place I want to be. That's not the kind of person I want to be. So I'm always like, but you got to remember.
Yeah.
But it's the same way when I'm preparing a message and I'm all like, oh, Paul, but you suck. Like, what are you even writing right now?
Yeah.
I'm always like, well, think about it. Well, number one, you're not doing the work. The Holy Spirit is. So there's that.
Yeah.
But chances are the people have heard something like this. So you're not the first one to think this.
Yeah.
So it's okay. You know, like, so it works both ways, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think the difference is then? And my mind is just sort of going in this direction right now. But like, what do you think the difference is, right? Because I think I just saw something on social media. There's another pastor / personality that was like trying to give an encouragement and all that stuff. You know, there is a thing called God-given gifts and grace and talent, right? There is such a thing as David was talented with the sword and the spear. Not only that, but David also had an incredible amount of wisdom and self-control. I'm thinking now to the fruits of the Spirit, you know, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. David had a lot of those things, right? And so the question becomes like, what is the difference in your minds between you rely on God's goodness, God's grace, and His effectiveness in a moment, and the fact that He's put a lot of things into your hands, right? Because like, I really wish some days, I really wish like I could just be like a marionette, and I'm just writing, and I don't know where it's coming from, but I'm writing, because then I can completely go like, that was all the Lord, right? But there are times when I struggle through something, and I struggle, and eventually I find it. I find the thing, and I get to the other side, and I'm able to weave this thing, this point, right? And so the question becomes, what is the difference between me doing that and me like relying too heavily on my own gifts and talents? You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
What's the difference between those two places?
I think it's just a vigilant remembering of who you are. Because even that ability to weave that line and find that place, you know, every person who writes a sermon who does this enterprise, right? You get those moments where you work so hard and then, okay, there it is, right? When those things happen, I'm like, that's pretty cool, but I realize, man, that didn't have to happen. You know, that insight didn't have to come. And what enabled me to get to that place, and it's, even if it's just the mind that God gave me, it still is God there. So I think it's really about kind of catching yourself, because it's so easy not to catch yourself and be like, yo, I'm the man.
Yeah.
You know? But yeah, it's just about a disciplined, constant perspective. Otherwise, it's and the funny thing is, when you get to a place where you're like, it's me, that's when you ventured into unreality.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, that's when you ventured into a place where you're unhinged and you're not in touch with what got you there, in touch with what the gift that God has given to you and things like that. I think what helps me is the fact that if, say, I preach a good message, but, I relied on my own gifts and my own talent, I think it was all me. I really believe, like, it was a waste of time.
Mm-hmm.
And I got tired of that feeling after a certain point in ministry. I was like, because at the end of the day, people forget about you. Like when they go home, they're watching TV. They don't care about your sermon, how well you preach, and you're like, oh my God, they loved it. It's like, it evaporates, and that helps too. But anyway, to answer your question, that line or the difference between gifts and kind of God taking that thing and using it, I don't know. I think it really is just a matter of disciplining yourself with perspective and humility.
Sure.
I don't know.
Sure. Yeah. What about you, Bobe?
I think first and foremost, I have to remember that whatever gifts and talents that I have is not from me. It's from God. So it's not actually my own totally. Does that make sense? And I know what it, like PK, like you said, like I know what it feels like when I lean just on my own giftings. There's such a limit to what I can give in my own gifting. And if I don't partner with the Holy Spirit, if I'm not submitting myself under the will of God constantly, especially when it comes to something like giving a message, because we're not just giving message to give information.
Sure.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, what we want to see is life change. And we want to see life change, like transformation that comes from the Spirit. It's not, I don't care about behavior modification. That's not what I'm asking for. That's not my goal when I put this together. It's to see the Holy Spirit work in you. That I can't do. And so if that is the goal of preaching, if that's what I desire to see, and I know that's what, the Lord desires to do, then I have to partner with God. There's no way. I can lean on my own gifting and think how great I am and know that I'm good.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it's a sin to know that you're good and acknowledge that you're good.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
That's also like kind of like dismissing the gifts that God's given to you. But you also have to remember it's not yours. And so, I think it's just the constant reminder of like, this isn't my own.
Yeah.
This isn't my own. And there's an aspect of my gifts that I can't tap into unless I'm submitted to God. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's such a fantastic point of like, it's like, think about bowling, right? Like you have a ball in your hands and eventually you got to get all 10 pins down at the end of this very long and narrow sort of a strip of thing. And different people have different techniques, but it doesn't always go the way that you think that it should. Like sometimes at the end of the day, once you've let go, you just got to trust that what should happen or what you want to happen will happen. And from a Christian and pastoral perspective, where does that trust, where does all of that kind of get placed? It gets placed in the hands of God.
Yeah.
Right? So like, I love that point, actually. That's a fantastic point of like, if your end goal was to give a great sermon, I don't know, like, let me know if I'm saying this right. It's like, if your end goal is to give a great sermon, then that's fantastic. Continue to do that and rely on your own strength.
Yeah.
But if the end goal is to actually see some heart transformation, life transformation, no amount of eloquent words will do that.
Yeah.
Like there's just, all of us as pastors, we're just trusting that once this stuff leaves our mouth, whenever it gets to the hearer's ear, the Spirit has taken it and given it life and is planting it very deep, and it's doing something, right?
Yeah.
It's doing something, And so, for you guys, like when you're preparing a message, is that something that you leave room for, or like? Because all three of us, right? We've talked about the idea that sometimes we sit down and we write and nothing comes out. We're like put our fingers to the keyboard and nothing happens. Other times it's just flowing. It's just flowing. And the idea, I don't know, the question is like, how deeply are you trusting that the Spirit is just going to take the words and do something else with it, right? Like, or is it some kind of a tandem? Like the ball isn't going to go in that direction if I'm throwing it here, so I can't expect the Spirit to do something this way if I'm going somewhere here with my words, right? So it's like you have to align and you have to kind of get it close. Like, what does that process look like for you guys?
Yeah, for me, I've stopped second guessing and trying to get behind who's doing what.
Yeah.
And I just pray and I say, God, I don't know the mechanisms and the processes through which ideas come into my mind, whether it's you, whether it's me, whether it's a combination of both or whatever. I'm just going to pray that my heart is in the right place. I'm going to pray that you take me and somehow through this process, you get the words that you want on the page, right? And that it's glorifying to you. And then I work my tail off to write, using whatever God has given me to write the best thing I can write. And then not taking pride in that per se, but like, okay, this is what's going to happen, God, and then I need you to take it from there. So I getting behind like, is that sentence, is that the idea that, and this and that. I'll think about that, like, is this the right thing to say and stuff like that, but I won't get too into like, is that God or is that me and things like that. I just really trust him, because if you tease out the process, you almost mess it up. Sure.
Yeah. For sure.
For me, it's not always, it's not with every text, but for the most of it, I need this word to transform me first so that I can share something worth listening to or worth conveying, I think. Because then I know how the Spirit is talking through this text. So I need that. And then I totally believe like you have to do your part in the research or in like the writing process. You have to do it, especially prayer. You have to pray when you're writing a message. I'm praying all the time while I'm writing. As I'm writing, I'm praying almost.
Sure.
And I'm trying to listen to what the Spirit is saying. And there's so many times where I'm writing, I sit down and I start writing and it takes a different direction. Not totally off, but just a little bit different, because that is the way that the Spirit is leading. And it makes so much more sense than what I've planned before.
Yeah.
And when that happens, I know it's going to hit.
Sure.
I just know it.
Sure.
Yeah. So, but I do know that I also do pray for like soft soil, like good soil for the hearts that are listening. And I never want what I say, because there's so much room for error because we're human. And I might not always hit the bullseye on exactly what the text is trying to say, stuff like that. So there's always room for error. And I always, in my prayers, I'm always covering that.
Sure.
Whatever is not you, Lord, just let it just disappear.
Sure.
We don't need that. I don't want that. Nobody needs that.
Sure.
And whatever is fruitful, whatever is from the Lord, let it grow, So, yeah. And I really believe like the Holy Spirit, even if it's not the best message, there's something the Holy Spirit does that just like hits people in the most random times, right? And so in that also I think is humbling.
Sure.
Knowing that it really, a lot of it isn't me. A lot of this can't be me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That what you just used a phrase that I use all the time, but now I'm starting to have second thoughts about. That thing of God, if it's you, let it be. If it's not, let it fall. Or some version of that thing, right? Do you think that in an era of smartphones, of recorded sermons, of live streams, of YouTube, and nothing dies on YouTube, like once it goes on the internet, nothing is dead. Does anything not of the Lord ever fall anymore? Do you know what I mean? Like sometimes you use a phrase or you use a word or you say a thing or whatever, like maybe that you didn't mean to say, or maybe you were confused, or maybe you were just had the wrong information, like maybe you just flubbed. And the thing is, like, does anything really fall in the era of the internet?
I think it can get buried. It gets buried, or it goes viral. If it goes viral, then you're doomed.
Sure.
That's true. Yeah.
Sure.
But, I've had preachers who have hundreds of tapes of their sermons. And, there's a few of them that's like, that's not exactly right. But it's in piles and nobody's ever going to listen to it again.
Yeah.
So that's the hope.
Sure.
Sure. But you're right. Who knows?
Well, I don't know, because like to the person who's, that idea, that phrase makes a lot of sense when there is a hearer in the room and they're listening to it in the moment, right? So like you say something and you give your sermon, and it's like, it's a 5,000 word sermon over the course of 40 minutes. I don't even know if that's a lot of words, but it's X amount of words over a time domain. And it's like, sure, it makes sense in the room because our attention spans are only so much that like you can really only like get so much and you can't get everything. And so it makes sense when you say like, Lord, if it's you, let it be. If not, let it fall. But then like we live stream our services.
Yeah.
We record our sermons, and then now I'm the one that, like, I listen back to them and I cut them and I splice them and then I put them out on our podcast. And it's like the same person that goes back and listens to try to get the good things, they're just as privy to the things that are not of the Lord, but they have not fallen. They've stayed right there.
Yeah.
Does it add any extra weight to the process at all for you guys?
I don't know. When I pray that section,
Sure.
because I pray that too, it's really more for me than for the listener. To remind me that my words have no weight unless the Lord decides to breathe on them.
Sure.
That's generally why I pray.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's for you, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's for me.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah, that's interesting. I've never heard somebody say it that way before.
I don't think, generally that's not for anybody else but me when I say that. Yeah, but I think like there is some kind of accountability though to make sure you got it right.
Yeah.
And to make sure like what you're saying is real.
Sure.
And like true.
Yeah.
Because somebody can tear it up on the comment section and be like, oh, this pastor, blah, blah, blah.
Doesn't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
It's not only in the comment section. There are entire sections of YouTube that are devoted to just cutting up a pastor's sermon. And there are some on there that I believe deserve to be cut up. And they deserve to just be everything, every stone unturned. But there are also so many pastors out there that are just trying to get the word out on a Sunday.
Yeah.
Like the word and just trying to get that out on a Sunday. And they flub or they whatever. And I those channels aren't really looking for those kinds of moments. They're looking for like theologically incoherent things, understandably. But it's like, man.
Maybe we should just put all our stuff on private.
Yeah. But it definitely has raised a level of vigilance in terms of prep, which I think to a certain degree is a good thing, but unfortunately there's no controls. So people take it all the way to the end. So yeah, I don't know. In terms of the word falling, my hope is even if it doesn't fall in the sense that it's permanently recorded in digital history, right? But I guess a prayer for me is even though it's digitally there, and they listen to it over and over again, it just doesn't take root in the heart as much as some other truth, things like that. But yeah, the permanence of it in digital history is something that's relatively new because digital history is so accessible. I mean, there's libraries full of books and books that are collecting dust that nobody's ever going to read again, and they're just not accessible. But nowadays, so that's makes it more dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder, I want to make a turn for a second because I wonder if we're veering too far into the territory of like this is for the pastor, because we don't just speak to pastors. In fact, a majority of our church is not pastors. They're family men and women. They're people just trying to work out their own salvation, fear and trembling, and all that stuff. The idea of two Davids, right? And I talked a little bit about this. I couldn't go too much into it. By the way, I thought I was going to give a 25-minute message. It ended up being closer to 40. And so that's a real big blind spot on my part. But the two Davids, I'm trying to make sense of the two Davids because I know what two Davids looks like for me, right? Because I'm a pastor. I've been doing this for a while. I just sort of have it tailor-made and understood in my context. But to the person that struggles with understanding what the two Davids looks like for them, right? Because like they're just trying to make sense of this world. How do we catch, right? Like, is there a way to catch before we get too far down the line or before we get too far gone? Is there a way to catch the presence or at the very least the idea that, oh, I see, I'm the first David when I should be the second. Like, how do we catch that in our lives? And this is more particularly for the one that isn't called to pastoral ministry.
It's rough.
Yeah.
Because when you're in the throes of something like that, you have so many defense mechanisms in place for you not to catch it.
Sure.
You know what I mean? It's rough. So it gets me thinking about David. How did he get to a place where he wanted this self-affirming census, right? When did his ego get so fragile, so insecure? And it actually brings me back to the song that the Israelites were singing, Saul killed his thousands and David killed his 10,000s.
Yes.
Right. And there's all that, oh my God, David's the man. And, that's probably at a certain level, as much as it was a true fact, it probably started stroking his ego, started feeding that. And that's where the line,
Yeah.
And then he probably got to a place in his ministry where he wasn't getting, not his ministry, his kingdom, where he just wasn't getting that, and he needed that itch scratched. And so the question is, like, how do you catch that idolatry as it's being lodged into your heart, right? And I don't know, I think we all have a sense that something is off most of the time when something is kind of like pulling you. So bring it back to the sermon, right? When you find yourself like, desiring more affirmation, and stuff like that, then, I know my heart, okay, my heart's probably not in the right place here. And so I don't know, that's really the best that I can do, but it's so hard to be self-aware. That's the difficulty, I think, in all of this.
I think you said it really well in the sermon. You said that the first David, his eyes are on the ground, and the second David, his eyes are to the Lord. I think that's the best indicator. And you're right. Like, there are a lot of like mechanisms that we place to, but I think when you experience anxiety like never before, when you're experiencing uneasiness in this situation, like, you can't not look at the situation.
Sure.
You cannot not look at what's happening in front of you. But when that is the bigger determining factor of you than what the Lord is saying or what God is doing, then that's where you should see, maybe something is not right now. There's something that convicted David, right? He was stricken with conviction and he turned his heart. I think that is the game changer. Like, there are people who know this is wrong or what they're doing is not good for them, but they keep doing it anyway. Right? And then there are people who are convicted, not convinced, convicted, because I think being convinced and being convicted is different. Being convinced, somebody has to like, oh, you keep telling you like, trying to get you to see, but when you're convicted, it's like that.
Yeah.
It's just one time, right?
Yeah.
And somebody like that, their heart is soft, I think. And so I think that's like really a big thing. Yeah, that's probably the biggest indicator. Where are your eyes? What are your eyes looking more towards? My human flesh always wants to grab and hold and try to take a census of what I have. What kind of power do I have to get through this? But I know when I'm in my right mind, not when I'm in my anxious, nervous mind. I know when I'm in my right mind that the Lord is my strength.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think those things are really, the indicators.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, sorry, I just want to add something. As much as it's difficult to be self-aware, it's not impossible. And I feel like the best defense is a good offense. You know, you're preempting kind of these things and building an ability to kind of be able to step back and know kind of, hey, what's going on inside of me right now? And the more you develop that discipline, the more I feel like you'll be able to catch yourself in these moments. And it's funny because David Benner actually talks about this, and he says, when you start getting into these places where you're sliding off, you know, when you're, you know, in a place where you're becoming the first David, you know, and this and that, there are certain psychological indicators that start kind of presenting themselves, like anxiety or sensitivity or a sense of kind of emptiness and things like that. If you can pull yourself back and notice those things, those are like trails to kind of your core issue, you know. And I think if you can get to know yourself and your tendencies and what happens when you're kind of straying toward the first David, I think you can catch yourself, and I think you can pray, by God, you know, I'm going in the wrong place. I'm in a bad place right now. Kind of help me, you know, get back to the second David position.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. It strikes me again, as I had kind of noted and outlined in my message, number one, the idea of time, and how, like, you know, from the moment that David orders the census to the moment that it says, like, he hears the number, he hears 500,000 men from this place and 800,000 men from this place. That's where I got the 1.3 million number. It strikes me again how, like, there's a certain bit of time, right? There's definitely, you got to know yourself. You also have to be, like, anchored to the Lord, and you got to be humble in order to finally, like, get to a place where you are confronted with it, like, you're able to act quickly and move on it. But the other thing that strikes me is the idea of time. Like, I went into this whole thing about, like, it took them 9 months and 20 days, full-term pregnancy plus 20 days, right? And part of it is because that's how vast the kingdom was. Yeah. And, you know, like, that's just what they needed to do. I mean, 500,000, 800,000, 1.3 million people. That's a lot of people, right? And that's just the ones to carry the sword. That doesn't take into account women and children. So the aspect of time, and what I'm trying to get at with the idea of time is, like, sometimes you don't know in a moment that you've messed up.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes it takes later where you have to face the consequences of when you messed up, and you have to face the consequences of the thing that you did when you crossed over, when you crossed that threshold into, you know, from the second David into the first David, from the David with the heavenly perspective to the one with the worldly perspective, right? So it's like, so maybe for a moment, maybe in a moment of weakness, you cross over that threshold and you mess up and you do that thing. later you might get to a place where you're faced with the consequences, right? Because every action has some kind of a consequence of it. And it's the idea of like which David are you going to be in that moment, right? Like David could have just continued to be the version of himself in 2 Samuel chapter 24 verse 10. He could have continued to be the version of himself that he was in 1 through 4. But verse 10, it clearly strikes a difference. It is the dividing line between there's this version of David and there's that version of David. Finally, he gets here, but it took him 9 months and 20 days. Sometimes it just takes time.
Yeah.
Right. So you got to be self-aware. Yes. You got to know your word, and you also have to be humble before the Lord. But every once in a while, you get to a place where like it's just going to take some time for you to see it. That's not necessarily an encouragement to like the person, because it's a weird kind of a backwards thing to say, like, in time you'll see how badly you've messed up, right? Like, hopefully you see it right away. But it's weird. This is more of an encouragement to someone who like wants to call something out in somebody else, right? Where it's like you could say everything that you want to say, but every once in a while, it just takes some time for that person to see it in themselves and to be moved to that place.
Yeah, I've had plenty of the moments like that where I look years back and like, yeah, that was a mistake.
Yeah.
But what's great about time is it gives you enough distance where the sting is still there, but you can turn it into wisdom.
Yep.
That's kind of the beauty of, I think, time. But yeah, really, that lesson is a big deal. I think I like that point. One thought I had was, I think you were skirting on this a little bit. David, when he comes to the full lucid realization of his sin, repents right away. That was the difference between him and Saul. Saul. So I'm going through 1 Samuel for my devotions. It's remarkable how many times whenever Saul's confronted with sin, he says, "But I did it this way for this reason." Defensive. And just kind of justifying and almost in a sense like, "Hey, I this was actually the better plan than God's plan." And so that was a huge difference, and that's where I feel like marks David's heart versus Saul. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I just had a thought earlier today, also yesterday a little bit too, about like, first of all, as a sinful man myself, number one, like, I feel like I understand David a lot, but I have a lot of sympathy. I'm not sure that I can say empathy. I don't know that I've ever been in the same place that David was, but I have a lot of sympathy for the things that David went through growing up.
Yeah.
Right. And basically, like, the end of the point is this, like, imagine the trauma that David, like, in a modern day, in contemporary culture, how many years of therapy would David had to have gone through just to get past all of the crap that he had to go through with Saul alone, let alone all the stuff that he had to go through with Absalom and the thing that he had to overcome in Saul, he finds in his own son, Absalom. It's like, can you just imagine the years of unpacking and therapy that he had to do, like, or he would have benefited from, but it's like, he didn't get that therapy. So what does he do? He messes up with Bathsheba, and then he starts thinking he's better than he is, and then he starts to do a census, and then later he's conscience stricken, so he has to make it right. And it's like, my point there is this: if you have a lot of what often is referred to as trauma, if you have a lot of trauma, I think there's a lot of sympathy for you, especially around this table, right? It's like we have a lot of sympathy for that, but there's also a thing of like, trauma is not a license for sin and sin patterns. Trauma is not necessarily a license for living a life of the first David. We recognize that that's where you might find yourself, but the encouragement from this story, 2 Samuel chapter 24, verse 1 through 9, 10, really, it's like, you don't have to be one version of that. You don't always have to be the first David. I mean, if you're making any kind of progress in this life, especially this Christian thing, experience, your entire life should be a slow but eventual, gradual move towards being the second David, of being the David in the prairie that he had to learn to be again in the palace. You know what I mean? It's like, just work through your stuff, yes. Yeah. But remember, like, that's not a license to sin. That's not a license to be like, before God's like, oh God, you gotta understand, I'm messed up and I am this way, and I'm short with my partner, or I'm short with my kids, or I skipped church because I need to make a better career for myself because I had so little money growing up and I was so poor and I never want that for my kids. It's like, listen, we get that. We all understand what that experience is like. But the truth of the scripture here is there's no license. Yeah. It's God is calling you into a higher reality. Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, I can only imagine the years of therapy that David would have had to go through.
Yeah, I think another way to say that is trauma is not your destiny.
Yes.
And trauma is not what defines you.
Yes.
You know, and that's actually, at the end of it, that's a hopeful thing. And, you know, trauma is so hard. Like, everything we just said is easier said than done.
Yes,
of course.
Yes.
But without that hope, then we can't work through our trauma. You know, there's nothing drawing us to the end, you know, to a healthier place. And so, yeah, that word of hope is very important.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a good place to kind of land this plane and round out this conversation. So, you know, if you're listening, if you're watching, just remember, the version of you that you are right now, whether you're good, whether you're bad, whether you're the first David or the second David in the message, it doesn't always have to be that way. There is a higher reality. Trauma is not your destiny. You know, all these things that we can recount and say over and over and over again. But at the end of the day, like, you're not going to know these things unless you yourself get your nose in the Word and just try to find it for yourself. Try to find what it looks like. I think all three of us around this table have a lot of sympathy, dare I say empathy, for things that you go through, and all of that built up trauma that just lingers and lingers and lingers, and it causes you to be a different version of yourself than you want to be. We get that. All three of us have a version of that in our own lives, but there is a higher reality, I believe, you know? And so, so it's really just a question of which David are you really, and which David do you want to be? So with that, we're going to bring this time to a close. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of NMPC Plus. It was a bit of a trek through some familiar and also some unfamiliar territories and topics, but we're just so thankful that you decided to listen and that you decided to make us part of your weekly rhythms. We'll be back next week with another new episode. So until then, we pray that you are blessed. And this is NMPC Plus signing off for now.